Sarah and I are strong believers that you don't need to have an occasion to drink champagne, and that champagne itself can just be the occasion. So I'm absolutely desperate to get going tonight whilst our wines are cold and fizzy. So introducing Sarah Knowles MW. Cheers, Sarah.
Cheers, Anna. It's lovely to be here tonight. Exactly as you say, Thursday nights are definitely the night for champagne. I think that too about Tuesdays. I hope that the membership agree. I also, have obviously put some sparkles on for champagne, and I hope that you're all making an evening of this. I'm so glad that so many of you have joined us. Champagne and learning about the different houses within Champagne, I always think some of our best masterclasses, mainly because these houses have such tremendous classic styles that they stick to. So it's really fantastic to learn which style is your favorite, or to be able to compare those and to be able to think about it in that sense. For me, this is also a time when I naturally think of champagne. February may not feel like the month that springs to mind when you think of champagne, but actually in a buying sense, this is usually the month when I'm in Epinay or Reims and tasting the still wines before they become champagne and fizzy as we know. So I tend to be in the rain and the sleet in Epinay and Reims around this time, tasting lots of these very high acid still wines to get a sense of that vintage. And of course, that's also odd because in the context of champagne, we always talk about non-vintage, or that tends to be the driving force of our conversation, and definitely the driving force of sales. And we check the vintage still wines each year really to see what they'll add to the other wines that will be part of their component when they're finally made into a non-vintage. And you can get quite a good sense of the year. So I'm missing out this year. I'm not out in France. I'm not tasting the still wines. In fact, I've got a few of them being sent to me so that I can still get some sense of the vintage before it gets blended. But I am delighted that we have a champagne event for you in February. And I'm delighted that Willem is here to host the event and to talk to you about everything Charles. I have my glass charged. I hope you all have a glass of your own champagne open. Of course, I'm on Heidsieck, but I hope that you guys have something delicious in your glass, and if not Charles Heidsieck, that this conversation and this masterclass prompts you to adding that to your basket next time. Willem, thank you for being with us tonight. I was going to hand over to you fairly quickly so that we can crack on with the good bit, because I know that we've already got questions coming, but do add questions that you'd like us to answer, either from the Wine Society side or from Charles Heidsieck's side, and we'll do our best later on. But over to you, Willem. Thank you.
Good evening, Sarah and the team at the Wine Society. Good evening, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here with you tonight. We all miss physical event and the tasting that we all love attending at the Wine Society. It's another physical, but FIZZ event tonight. You know that the French can do some puns, and I will get my first jab of Charles now. So you know that when you open a bottle, you release the cage. By the way, the cage is always 6 turns. You can try you always unscrew 6 times to release the cage, whatever is the bottle of champagne. Little anecdote, and always put your thumb on it, because it can pop quite quickly, especially with the new technological cork we use. And you can decide to make a noise or not. I think we all deserve a bit of noise. So good evening, everyone. My name is Willem. I happen to be Champenois. Nobody is perfect. So I come from Champagne. I actually come from the south of Champagne. So if any of you have traveled to this beautiful region, I come from Troyes. Lovely, small, medieval city, 150 kilometers down south from Reims. Actually, the Seine is going through Troyes, and that's just between Reims, so the Montagne de Reims, the Marne Valley, the Côte des Blancs, and the Côte des Bars in the south near Chablis and near Burgundy. And so that's where I grew up. And I have the pleasure to look after Charles Heidsieck in the UK and Ireland, and to walk you through some part of the history of Charles and what makes us unique, what makes the Brut Reserve one of the best non-vintage, and a non-vintage which by many aspects is more a multi-vintage or is as good as a prestige cuvée. And to make you discover that, please ask your question, Sarah, Anna, whenever you want during my presentation, if you feel that there is something relevant to ask at any point, and I shall start sharing a bit of history. Can you all see? I will try to put that in display mode. Can you? I was about to say, can you all see? But I guess I will just trust Sarah.
I can see, and my internet's very dodgy. So if I can see, I'm sure.
Actually, I think that's going to be even better like that. Good. So first of all, I need a glass because there is nothing more boring than listening to someone, at a cocktail speech or something with an empty glass. So cheers, everyone. Charles.
Cheers.
And good evening. I will come back on that. So a bit of history. First of all, to put things back in context, I think, Sarah, you pointed out very rightly that we are very lucky in Champagne because most of the Grand Marques, of the great houses, they have an amazing patrimony, an amazing history. And it's just a pleasure to be able to dig into this history to share it. And Charles was a very important character in Champagne. I think you have probably two very important characters in the 19th century that really made Champagne famous to the world and really established the Grand Marque and the sparkle and the spirit of celebration. For me, it's the widow Clicquot, whom from her desk managed at a time where women were usually not in charge, managed to almost put an orchestra in place as a champagne house. And the other one, the kind of wild knight, kind of chevalier, very flamboyant of Champagne, was Charles Heidsieck conquering the world. And many of you might not know, but that's Charles Heidsieck that gave the expression that was the origin of the expression Champagne Charlie. So Champagne Charlie is Charles Heidsieck, and that might be news for most of you. And I will tell you why. It's because this young man, he was a young man at some point. He aged as we all do, but he was born in 1822, and in the 19th century, by many ways, is really the century of the Champagne expansion. What happened in the Champagne history? It's that early in the 1700s, Champagne started develop itself thanks to a lot of German and Prussian entrepreneurs who came to Champagne originally for textile. And that was the case of the ancestor of Charles Heidsieck, who was called Florence Ludwig Heidsieck. Champagne was indeed a very famous place for fabric, for textile. Troyes, actually, in the medieval time, was a center place in Europe where you had a huge fair called the Foire de Troyes, where all the artisan, craftsmen, painter, people working on leather would gather every year. And Florence Ludwig Heidsieck came to Champagne as a draper originally, and because in the middle of the 1700s you had the Industrial Revolution, a lot of these German entrepreneurs had to stop producing fabric because the machinery made them totally uncompetitive, and started actually exploiting or digging a bit more into the other famous area of the Champagne region, which was sparkling wine, which at that time, middle of the 1700s, it was really, it was starting to get a bit fizzy, but that was not what we know today. That was not industry number one of the region. And so that was the great-grandfather of Charles Heidsieck. And basically, this chap, Florence Ludwig Heidsieck, gave the house to one of his nephews, and his nephew had a very famous business partner that became Piper Heidsieck. That's where the name comes from. And Charles was their nephew. He was working with them. He was in his 20s, and he could have stayed very safe in the house working with his uncles, but he got a bit bored and he wanted to, write the story for himself, and to find his own market, to create his own champagne. So at 29 years old, in 1951, he decided to depart from the family house and to create his own house. So that's why you have Piper Heidsieck, the red label champagne, which is different from Charles Heidsieck, which is also different from Heidsieck Monopole. So Charles created his champagne, but the problem he faced in the middle 1800s was that champagne was a very old-fashioned, established market where the only customers were royal courts in Europe and military circles. And Charles Heidsieck, obviously, despite having a very famous name, Heidsieck, he didn't have any credential for his wine. So it was very difficult for him to tap into any royal courts or any market, because people would overlook his wines, overlook this young man who dares departing from the family house. So the only choice he was left with was to actually take a steamer in 1852 from Liverpool, that's the reality, to Halifax. And doing so, he was the first champagne merchant to go physically, to go in person to what would become the United States. And he did PR in the 1850s and marketing. But for him, the way of marketing his wine was to market himself. So he just threw parties for celebrities, politicians, actors, actresses, anyone who made, journalists, anyone who could make the news at that time. And he explained the American what is champagne. And that's the article you see on the right of my page. It's probably the first article published in the US explaining what is champagne. You see a riddling table on the left, you see some wooden cases. On the right, you see the Marne Valley and the ships, bringing the boat to Paris and then to the US. And Charles Heidsieck popularized champagne and created what's now the second largest market for champagne worldwide. Actually, head to head with the UK. We are still fighting, but we are not giving up. But the Americans do drink a lot of champagne, and certainly of Charles. And just to give you an idea, in the 1860s, we were selling more Charles every year in New Orleans than we are currently selling in the entire UK. Now, the New Orleans was, and when I say more, it's 4 times more. Wow. So at that time, New Orleans was, they were roughly drinking 300,000 bottles of Charles every year. So, but the market was not as big. He was the only one. He really made a name for himself. So he traveled there 4 times. If you are interested in history, there are books about Charles Heidsieck. There is a movie. It's the only champagne house that has a movie with Hugh Grant, actually, starring Champagne Charlie. It's an horrible movie. It's really one that you should. It's really one to watch now when you are at home and you have nothing to do and you need to stay you are in your lockdown. But frankly, it's not gonna win any Oscar anytime soon. And it's a fantastic history. He got put in jail because he was carrying some diplomatic letters. So he was caught for spying. Napoleon III had to put pressure on Abraham Lincoln to release him. Just enormous story. And Charles at the end of his life was almost bankrupt because he had been put in jail in America and then released without any money and without money for the champagne he sold in the US. And eventually, at the end of his life, a lawyer actually came to him in Champagne and gave him property titles. These were property titles that his agent in America that had never paid him for the champagne he sold. So property titles that the agent, thanks to the money, had acquired in what was, in the beginning of the 1860s, a very small town in Colorado. And by the end of the 60s, that became one of the biggest towns in the middle of the gold rush, and that was Denver, Colorado. So Charles Heidsieck, when he thinks he is bankrupt and he needs to stop producing champagne, at the end of his life, actually gets the equivalent of a third of now what would be city business district in Denver, Colorado. He sells all the properties bit by bit, and he purchases this beauty underground in Champagne, the Crayère, the cellars. Crayère means chalk cellars. What you see on the picture is one of the most amazing, incredible thing that I think you could see from your life. I said, full stop. It's really, I don't have words to describe it. It was built by the Roman slaves, these famous Italian tourists that came 2,000 years ago and invaded Europe. So the Roman, when stopping in Reims, because they settled in Reims and they created an oppidum, they created a city, they dug the chalk because it's the famous part of Champagne. We have lots of chalk in our soil. That's why our grapes are so powerful, and our vines retain so much the freshness. But the Roman, to build the city, dug underneath the city the chalk in these huge underground pyramids, underground churches, with lots of galleries connecting them. So in the Middle Age, that was used to grow mushrooms, like we have in Paris. That was used as a food cellar in the 1700s and almost forgotten about. And Charles Heidsieck bought some in 1867 and was one of the first champagne merchants to find that it was the perfect place to age champagne. And what you see on the picture on the left at the very far end, it's a wall of bottles aging. It's where we age all our champagne. It's 30 meters underground. You have a stable temperature of 11 degrees, be it -5, like today it is in Champagne, or +35 outside. It has 80% plus humidity and no vibration, which is the perfect cellaring condition. I hope we could all have Crayère under our houses to age our Charles Heidsieck. And that creates a very subtle bubble. It really improves the aging of the champagne. And so we are the second largest owner of these chalk cellars. You have 5 houses that own these chalk cellars in Champagne. And we have so 47 chalk pits. And by the way, on the left, you see the picture that explains you why our bottle has this shape. See? For ages, we've been calling this Crayère the bottle Crayère, the bottle pit. So that's why when we changed the bottle around for the bottling 2008, which came on the market in 2012, we chose this shape to change the bottle.
I have to say, Willem, it is one of the most beautiful cellars in Champagne.
It is, and we've kept it kind of intact.
It's very cathedral-esque.
It's very cathedral. We are lucky because I think we have the deepest. We have it's funny because they are all different, and I know. And some of them have bottles aging in them, and some of them are empty, and sometimes it changes because we move stock from a Crayère to another as we disgorge or as we label. And once I remember coming into this one that you have on the right, which was totally emptied, and you go in the center and you speak, and it resonates and it echoes like if you are in a church. And actually we had an opera singer coming one day for a visit. She happened to be a Charles lover and drinker and collector. And she came there, she started crying and she started singing. And that was just, I still have the goosebump. It's quite special. It's classified as part of the UNESCO World Heritage Patrimony since 2017. And really encourage you to come and visit if you can. It's beautiful.
I also think it's wonderful that the bottle is now designed based on the shape of your cellar, which is, sort of only a quirk that the Champenois can get away with.
Yeah.
Particularly beautiful.
Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting you.
No, absolutely. No, that's great. It's great. And that's the story, how it not how it ended, but how Charles restarted, with the Crayère, the cellar, and how it was went up and up, and And then, funny story, every descendant of Charles Heidsieck, so he was called Charles Camille Heidsieck. Every descendant was called Charles something Heidsieck. So you have Charles Jean, Charles Jean-Marc, Charles Henri, and they all brought something. Charles Jean, whom you have in the main one here, he was in charge of the house during the Prohibition. And can you believe it? During the Prohibition, Charles smuggled more bottles to the US through the Canadian border than we are currently selling annually worldwide. So 1 million bottles of Charles every year were smuggled during the Prohibition through the Canadian border. So that's incredible. And I just wanted to share with you some memorable times. And I know you are all lover of Paul and Paul Roger and Churchill at the Wine Society. Can you believe that the victory tour of Churchill was actually celebrated with Charles Heidsieck, not with Paul? And we have the purchase order. We have the purchase order. It seemed like Dali did a collaboration with Charles. Charles was actually, I don't know if some of you are fans of sailing, but Charles was really involved in the Whitbread race in the late 70s, early 80s. And actually the very first trimaran, racing trimaran, which is the ancestor of the big GC32 currently racing the America's Cup, that was a Charles Heidsieck boat. And Charles Heidsieck boat arrived second in 82 or 83 on a monohull with Alain Gabet, where he just arrived after a boat much bigger than them, after having breaking their mast and repaired it. It's just fantastic. Also, Dwight, General Dwight Eisenhower. An amazing history is that Eisenhower was kind of in his headquarters, or he was residing in Reims at the very end of the Second World War, and that's where he received a call from the German commandant tour for the to stop the war, for the capitulation. Sorry, I was finding my words here. And actually, when the Queen, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II did her first official visit to the US, and she was welcomed by President Eisenhower, he welcomed her with Charles Heidsieck, with Champagne Charlie, because the history between Americas, between Charles Heidsieck and the UK was so strong. And you will never believe me, but the owner of Charles Heidsieck 3 years ago bought the residence that Eisenhower used to stay in Reims, which is an hotel particularly really superb. And there is still the room, not untouched, of where he received the call. And I've been there during the building works and things like that. And you can still see the wooden panel that are there, that have been there since the 40s, because the owner of the hotel never touched it. And that's going to be a place where we're going to be able to welcome visitors and guests from 2022, I think.
Oh.
So
hopefully by then we're traveling.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope so. So lots of funny stories and anecdotes. We are the sponsor of the champagne partner of the Concours of Elegance, which is a classic car show at Hampton Court Palace, and it's a beautiful car show. I really encourage you to go. It's usually in September, and I met there His Royal Highness the Prince Michael, with I don't know if you know, but he's a big classic car fan, and he was telling me his stories and anecdotes of when Charles was really the second largest champagne brand in the UK, which was the late 80s, and he remembered it very, very well, because Charles really grew, especially in the UK, and was the second largest champagne brand back in the 88, 89. So really a big story. Now, in terms of Charles today and what makes it unique or very special, it's it's totally about what we have in the glass. We went from second largest champagne brand in the 80s to now almost one of the smallest, most boutique houses of champagne, with a huge focus on the wine, on the aging, on the quality, producing a champagne that can be enjoyed, for aperitif, but also with food, with fish, but also with meat, with dessert. As you know, it's always tricky with champagne because it's relatively dry, although it has a bit of sugar, so it doesn't always pair well with dessert. But that's really a wine at the same time that it is a champagne. And the way we achieve that, and the reason why we are, I think, where we are today, and the quality is so recognized of Charles, it's really that first of all we pay attention to the grapes. Cyril always says, you can't make good wine out of bad grapes. You can certainly make bad wine out of good grapes if you are not a good winemaker, but it's impossible to make good wine out of average or bad grapes. So that's really, really important for us. And then the second really important thing is it's the blending. We blend a lot of different wines from a lot of different years, and that really makes the generosity of Charles and the aging. And just on the growing, I just put a map of Champagne because I don't know, you probably have some members here who, they could pick some villages that they know very well, and they will know that in Charles you have this, or in Paul you have that, or Bollinger is in Haï, and some other who have no clue at all how big or how small is Champagne. So look, it's a map of Champagne where you see the colors is where you have vineyards. I basically come from here where it's written Trois, where you see that there is just this small vineyard here called Mongueux, but then you need to drive down or to drive up if you want to find some vineyards. And it's a big region, and between the vineyards, it's actually beetroot land or barley or wheat, so very agricultural. Actually, my grandparents were kind of cereals farmers, and not really in the champagne business at all. And it's a very fragmented region where you have more than 320 different villages who produce champagne. And in all these villages, you have several families, and these several families are sharing a lot of plots and parcels. So sometimes you are in front of a 2 or 3 hectares parcel, and you have 20 families sharing it. Sometimes you have just 2 or 3 rows. So you have a huge diversity of terroir, of soil. You have a lot of sand in the Marne Valley here, where it's light green. You have a lot of chalk here in the Côte des Blancs, and it's mostly Chardonnay. The Montagne de Reims, it's mostly Pinot Noir, like the Côte des Bars in the south of the region, but the soil is totally different. Much more chalk in the north, much more limestone in the south, very close to Chablis. And the specificity of Champagne, the particularity is the blending. It's to be able to blend different villages from, making obviously different wines from different years and with different grapes. That was the kind of dream of Dom Pérignon, who didn't create Champagne, but created the first idea behind blending. And Charles is very much one of the houses that pushes the cursor of blending at the very top of what we do in the appellation. We work with more than 200 families of growers. So we own 15% of what we need. So we own 80 hectares. But we work with 200 families of growers. Some of them we've been working with for 80 years. So now it's at the 4th generation. And it's this relationship with the grower that's really important, because we can be organic or sustainable in our own vineyard, but that's only 15% of what we need. The real goal is to get growers on board, to know them very closely. That's why our cellar master, our chef de cave, Cyril, is a grower himself. He has vineyard. He comes from a family of growers in Haï, where Bollinger is based, for example. And his job is to go and see growers all year long, not only at the harvest time, but at the moment when they are pruning, or later for the flowering or debudding, and to discuss with them, to understand what's happening in their vineyard, especially nowadays with climate change. It's really important to be there to understand how the grape and how the vines are evolving, who are the growers who are suffering, who are the ones that actually are okay, and to work with them. And therefore wines become individual, and they become ingredients in a recipe that's much easier to make. They are musicians in an orchestra, and our conductor actually knows his musician very well. He doesn't discover them the day of the premiere, and that's very, very important. So we work very closely with them. We are also introducing new method and backing startups. So the robot that you see it's called VTBot. It's a startup that basically uses artificial intelligence to treat the vine precisely where it needs it, when it needs it, to limit the amount of not of pesticide, because we don't use any, but the amount of treatment we make, and being much more precise in what we do, and also being able to go under the rain and so on and so on. So it's really important. Vineyard is 80-90%. I'm sure you would back me up on that, Sarah, but it's 90% of what you have in the bottle. And knowing the differences of terroir, the differences of maturity, the differences with the relationship with the grower, because a grower can deliver grapes to 10 different houses, because it's normal. They are hedging their bets, so they are not putting all their eggs in the same basket. But which house gets the grape at the best time? That's based on relationship. So in a year where it's really hot, like 2018, where the maturity is going to be heavy, Cyril is asking to get the grapes the first. And in a year where there is a lot of freshness and acidity, we are going to be more at the back end of the picking. And this is just based on relationship. Blending, it's making a ratatouille. For many years, we've only used stainless steel vat at Charles Heidsieck. And since Cyril joined in 2015, he started introducing a little bit of oak to bring a bit of texture, to bring an extra layer, but you wouldn't notice it at all. Actually, there was a beautiful article from Jancis Robinson published last week, where she, actually Julia Harding, a Master of Wine writing for Jancis, who raves about the Brut Reserve, the latest edition, and about what Cyril has brought. And it's really Cyril's job to respect the identities of the wine and to make a ratatouille. I like the metaphor of the ratatouille, because you have two ways of making this vegetable stew, kind of. Either you chop all your veggies, put them in a pan, and you wait 45 minutes, an hour, and you have a nice veggie stew. It's nice, but you don't have identities. You don't have the difference between the aubergine and the courgette or the tomato. The other way of making the ratatouille is to cook each ingredient individually at the right temperature for the right amount of time, and then you put them together at the end, and boom, in the oven for 20 or 30 minutes. And then you have an explosion of flavors. That's what we do with wines to create the Brut Reserve. We blend 120 wines, vinified separately in their own cask or stainless steel vat from 20 different years. And that's when the notion of reserve wines, or wines that we hold back in vats, come into play. We have the Bank of England of reserve wines in Champagne. We have the largest library of reserve wines, of still wines, that Sarah was talking about. And it's really important for us, because they are the identity of our Brut Reserve. It's the backbone. It used to represent 40% of the blend. Now it's 46% of what you have in a bottle of Brut Reserve. And they are really bringing the texture, the generosity in the wines that you have in front of you. If you've bought the bottle in the year that just okay, or even in the year before. The oldest wine would be from 1996.
Willem,
And it's still the case, and it's still the case in the current release, where, so, you know, I have Lead in the Chalk Cellar 2017 on my back label. Most of you will probably have 2016 or 2015. Yes. That means the youngest wine is 1 year before. So my youngest wine is 16 here, and yours probably going to be 15 or 14. Imagine that the oldest is 1996, and this
Willem, no just for context, 46% is reserve wines, but relative to other champagnes, that's very high, isn't it?
So it's not only a question of percentage, it's also a question of age. If you take Bollinger will use 40% reserve wines, but they are 3 years old on average. Some are aged in magnums, some are aged in cask, but they are young reserve wines. So there is a lot of reserve wines, but they are young. At Charles, we don't use reserve wines younger than 4 years old.
Okay.
Because they don't bring anything more. And our reserve wines go back 20 years, but the average age is 10 years. Except from Krug, nobody else does that in Champagne. Nobody else. Then you would have lots of houses with 30, 35% reserve wines, maybe 4 years old on average. It really depends. But at Charles, we keep them in stainless steel vat on their fine lees. So there is a nice interaction with the lees, so it protects them from the oxygen. You know, I tasted this 96. This 96 oldest wine that we have is a Grand Cru Chardonnay from Cramant in the Côte des Blancs. It tastes like a wine is 10 years old, not even. Yeah. I would, you know, put it blind in a lineup of old Burgundy. You would say, well, you've put a young wine here. The intensity, the concentration is really impressive.
Yeah. I think one of the members has commented about the sort of pricing structure of Champagne versus Crémants produced in France. And I think some of that really is tied into the average age of the reserve wines and, of course, the length of time on the lees. And with Charles Heidsieck, for example, you're talking about using very old wines you've had to store and keep for a long time.
Absolutely.
And you store and keep the wine for further as it develops those bubbles. But no, it's just one of the many integral parts that creates a very fine wine. I realize we've also starting to get close on time, so I won't interrupt again. I'll let you.
No, but interrupt because it's an extent.
We have a lot of questions coming in.
And you know, the last part is obviously aging. Our late chef de cave, Thierry Roset, used to say, you know, at Charles we use four grape varietal. We use Chardonnay, 40%. We use Pinot Noir, 40%. We use Meunier, 20%, and we use Time. And Time is the varietal that unlocks the potential of the others. And I think that's very, very important. At Charles, we take the time. We take the time to keep reserve wines. We take the wines to do things in general, the relationships, you know, nothing happens very quickly at Charles. Although Charles, it's not, you know, it's not an old lady, excuse my French, but it's, you know, everything takes time. And we age all our bottles in the Crier for minimum of 3 years for our non-vintage. And that's really, you discover time with our vintages. So the vintage 8 or 12 is 7 or 9 years on the list. The Blanc des Millénaires is minimum 11 years. So we take time. I've put something also because I know a lot of you like to age your non-vintage champagne, and I agree with you. Non-vintage is beautiful when it ages. We did, you know, Charles, we pioneered a lot of things, and one of the things we pioneered in the 90s was a concept called mise en cave. Mise en cave means laid in the chalk cellars. So in the 90s, we released the Brut Réserve with a little date at on the front, which was the date we bottled the wine. So 1 year after the base year, after the youngest wine, and so the year of the bottling. And that gives you an indication of when the non-vintage was based on. You know, you remove a year and you know, okay, mise en cave 1996 is non-vintage based on 1995 with 15, 20 years of reserve wines. Well, we stopped it early when everyone started understanding it at the beginning of the 2000s. We stopped it because the champagne body was telling us off, because that was confusing people with the vintage. And anyway, to make a long story short, we still have some bottles. We still have in the cellar some bottles with the mise en cap. So we are able to say, oh, this was a non-vintage from the 90s. This was a non-vintage from the late 80s. And we released some in the market at the end of last year, 2020. And we did an amazing vertical testing with journalists all over the world, but thanks to Zoom at the same time. So I'm lucky because I'm Greenwich Meridian in the UK. So it was 12 or 2 p.m. for us, but Chicago was up at 7 a.m. and Tokyo was up at 10 p.m. for this tasting. And so one had breakfast, the other was about to go to a nightclub, or actually not, because that was COVID, and we were just finishing that. Anyway, and we did a fantastic tasting where, so that's the one that Julia Harding reviewed for Genesis, and Decanter wrote about it as well. And it was basically amazing to see how long a non-vintage can age, and a non-vintage like Charles Heidsieck. We had the mise en cap 2000 and 2001, so based on 99 and 2000. We had the mise en cap 96. We even had 88, and the wines were beautiful. So Charles Heidsieck non-vintage can age as long as a vintage, and now it can age even longer because we are putting small things in place. That's another thing that Cyril put in place to help managing the oxygen. And that might sound geeky, but it's important if you want to age your champagne. There are two things that we do. We use technical or technological cork, Diam. So if you look at the most recent, it's cork, but it's not your kind of traditional 2 slices of bark put on a cork. It's, no, I don't know if you see, but it looks like it's agglomerated, and it's great because you don't have cork tank with that. So you can age your bottle and you won't have a cork bottle. And on top of that, the elasticity is always the same, so you don't end up with a cork very shrinked that has let all the oxygen come. And the other innovation that we use is what you see on the picture here. You see a little red kind of needle, and this, it's once we have disgorged the wine, when it's ready to get the final cork on at the top of the bottle, we drop a bit of water and sulfate at a very high speed, and you can see in the picture it creates a foam. It bubbles, it creates the foam, and the foam is vacuuming the oxygen, removing the oxygen from the top of the bottle, and then you cork, which means that when the bottle ages in your cellar, there is no oxygen between the cork and the wine. So it reduces the contact with the oxygen, and that's a way of having a wine that ages even longer. The Brut Reserve, I've told it a little bit, what I hope most of you have in your glass. It's a blend of 120 wines from 60 villages. We use the 3 grapes. It's more Pinot and Chardonnay and less Meunier for a simple reason. Young wines, which are 50–60% of the blend, are the 3 varietals. The reserve wines, it's only Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. And then we age it for 3 years. But I'm conscious of the time, and I'd rather you ask me questions that I keep speaking. So see you in Reims. That's our beautiful pavilion. Come, we are close to the public, so you need to email Sarah, Anna, or someone before. Otherwise, the door will be shut. But we might do some open doors in the summer.
Oh, well, hopefully we will all be with you in the summer. Thank you so much, Willem. That was a wonderful introduction to Charles. I've already filled my glass twice, so I'm hoping that I need to slow down a little bit, but I hope members have pretty much got through the bottle.
Yeah, I need to catch up with you, Sarah. Goodness,
Yes,
I was so enthralled. I actually wasn't even thinking about enjoying it, but wow, it is tasting absolutely beautiful.
But no, that was wonderful. And I've seen that we've got a lot of questions coming in, but actually while we're still on aging, Willem, and I'm sorry, Anna, for messing up orders, but we have a quick one in about the 2012 vintage, which is selling at the moment, because I think I've given it 10 years continued cellarage. And of course, Phil Murray is rightly pointing out that's probably a little bit short.
Yeah.
How long would you give it? I'm always very conservative, and we always are at the Wine Society because we want to make sure members enjoy it before it goes over the hill. So we said, and we would.
I think in many extent, 12 reminds me about a lot of vintages from the 80s because a lovely texture, great acidity, great freshness as well, but very opulent and very gourmand. The word for this vintage for me is gourmand. It's a bottle of champagne, of wine. You open it, you finish it within 15-20 minutes. It's a disease. It's really sorry to use this word, but it's really a virus. And the 12, it's gonna be like it is today for a couple of years. Then gonna start developing lovely toasted hazelnut notes up until 5-6 years. Then it's gonna get even more into the coffee. Not yet caramel, but maybe some more toasted, roasted aromas. And when it gets to this stage, usually it's on the tracks to go very long. So I would say 20 years minimum. I would say 20 years. So we are in 2021. So 20 years would be 41. In 41, this wine will be 30 years old. Yeah, totally. Yeah. Look, at the moment we enjoy vintage from the 90s. It's very much 98 like the 12, I think.
There we go.
So I wouldn't have any problem, especially because we've bottled it with the Diam core, with the jetting. So you can trust it. I would say if you have 6 bottles, you can open it. The problem of this vintage is that if you open 1 bottle, you are going to finish them within a year. So you need 2 cases. You need 2 cases. You put a lock on 9 of them, on 9 bottles. You drink 3 in the first year. Then you can't remember you have drunk 3. But you drink 3 in the first year, and then you wait to get to the next stage. So after 3 years, let's say, then you enjoy maybe 6 within 5 and 10 years. And then you have 3 left between 10 and 20 years. I would say I would go like that.
No,
Stephen Spurrier always says. Stephen Spurrier always says, you know why Bordeaux are producing wine in cases of 12, because you drink 6 too young, 3 at the right stage, 3 too late.
No.
Well, Willem,
12 is a stunning vintage though. So if you have any of it, whenever you decide to drink it in the next 20 to 30 years, it should be a wonderful glass. But I will be very lucky if any of mine go beyond 10 years.
Yeah.
I will.
Have a member, Willem, who's actually drinking the 90s this evening. So somebody's drinking
I saw a 96. I saw a 96.
Yeah.
And someone else saying that they were drinking the British fish and chips, which I couldn't agree more.
Oh.
That's great.
Over to you, Anna.
So I think we're going to start. Actually, Michael's asked, but we had another member ask earlier, Serena. Now, we always get this question, doesn't matter what wine it is, but particularly pertinent for champagne. So we're going to start with it, and then we'll have the other questions specific to you, Willem. But champagne, personal choice. What glass do you drink it in?
Alors, not the flute, because the flute, it's great to see the bubbles, but it's like going to the opera with earplugs. So you are missing a part. You are missing a part of the experience. Why? Because you need a speaker, especially for a champagne like Charles. So you see, I drink in a wine glass. Actually, that's Jancis Robinson glass. It's very close to what you have, Anna, and it's great because you have a nice base. It opens up the wine, and then a narrower top, which reconcentrates the aromas. It's very important because if you have a glass that stays straight, the aromas are going out. That's why in the coupe, on top of spilling everything on you, you can't really smell the aromas. But I spotted that Sarah has a Charles Heidsieck glass actually. So you see, this was a glass. It's a tulip glass. So it's kind of a big flute. It looks small there, but it's actually 45 centiliters. So you can more than half a bottle you can pour in there.
Relative to my head.
And it's so this is made by Lehman Glass, and it was designed by a sommelier in Champagne called Philippe James, who was actually frustrated of not having right glasses for champagne. So same thing, you see a narrow beginning to see the bubbles. a nice surface, and you can swirl absolutely, because you should with Charles, and then it gets narrower to concentrate the aromas. Brilliant from non-vintage to prestige cuvée.
However, Willem, I have to say, I only have one Charles Heidsieck glass, but I normally drink champagne. I agree with Anna from a white wine glass. I think, especially good champagne, good sparkling wine generally deserves a white wine glass. But
Sarah, it's fine. That just means you have to drink the whole bottle yourself. Lovely. No one else. So excuse.
I also always caveat, though, that all sparkling wines and champagne is better than no sparkling wines and champagne, whatever the glass. So if you happen to have friends serving you fabulous wine in flutes or in coupes or in mugs, it's always better to have champagne than not.
Absolutely.
You bogged down in it, but a white wine glass by preference.
Wonderful. So we had an email question in earlier that I'm just getting up now from Robin. And Robin has asked, perhaps the speaker this evening could let us know the views of Charles Heidsieck on the use of malolactic fermentation in their wines.
You have 3 hours, no dictionary, no calculator.
I think probably I should start with really brief explanation of malo, if that's all right. So Willem, if you're happy to really quickly explain what malolactic fermentation is, and then what percentage or usage there is of malolactic in Charles Heidsieck.
The malolactic fermentation, I think, it bears the names because it's a transformation of the acids in the wine, in any wine, from what we call the malic acid to the lactic acid. So you have 2 fermentation to make a wine. You have an alcoholic fermentation that transforms sugar into alcohol. That's why grapes become wine. But then once you have the wine, you have some enzymes that can basically transform the acid of the wine into a softer acid. So the usual, and then I will refer to Sarah if I'm not precise enough or clear enough, but the usual thing to picture it is bite in an apple or in a lemon, try to figure out the level of acid. You see, it's quite, you're already doing that at home. Okay, that's the malic acid. And then drink a glass of milk, lactic milk, rings a bell. And you see the softer acid, you see the texture. So the malolactic fermentation gives 2 things to a wine. It softens the acid and it increases the texture. It's very important. The second one is often missed out, especially when you start learning about wine. And that's why we do a lot of the malolactic fermentation at Charles, because we want texture. As a winemaker, you can decide to block the malolactic fermentation. So in normal time, if you let the wine go, most of the wine would go naturally through the malolactic fermentation. So in champagne, in particular, especially in the 60s, mostly like 70s, when we started understanding malolactic fermentation in the 60s, I'd say, in champagne, late 60s. So some winemaker decided to keep a fresh style of champagne, to have the bubble thin and then the acidity, the refreshing style. They decided to block the malolactic fermentation, which is not really our philosophy at Charles. However, with climate change, with change of maturity, of level of acidity in the wine, and also I'm not going to get into too much detail, but basically to transform malic acid into lactic acid, you need to have a certain type of enzyme and acid. And basically, some of the wine now, basically when they go through from malic to lactic, there is actually not much of a change. Okay. So whereas 20 years ago, there was a big change. And again, I won't drill into the details. But anyway, it's a variable that the winemaker can use. And at Charles Heidsieck, now, since Cyril arrived, we decided to block some malolactic fermentation to retain freshness on some wines, especially some wines that are going through oak fermentation, because the oak is giving the texture, and we can then get wines who still have texture, although they haven't gone through malolactic fermentation. They still have texture because they went through oak for fermentation and aging, but we don't do the malo to keep the freshness and not have wines too heavy. Voilà. I hope it was clear.
Perfectly clear. Thank you very much. And
for So the precise answer to the question is we didn't used to block malolactic fermentation. So we used to undergo all malolactic fermentation for 100% of our wine for texture. However, climate change plus use of barrel plus being more precise with the wine brought us to not go through malolactic fermentation for 4 to 10% of the wines, depending on the cuvée or the vintage, etc., etc.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Willem. That was a very thorough answer, but absolutely fascinating to hear the textural difference in particular. It's not something that gets talked about very much. Now, Sarah, I was just going to mention that actually the stocks that we have at the Wine Society at the moment, we've held on to a bit. So for members who are interested in slightly more aged non-vintage wines, we're sitting on a bit of a gold mine, am I right?
Yes, no, I think any member enjoying a recent bottle purchased from us of the non-vintage Charles is in a very good place, because we've kept it about 12 months. So it's had little extra aging as a non-vintage, which I particularly enjoy, and I know members really enjoy. So it's not something we can do with all champagnes, but we're delighted to have been able to do it with this, so that hopefully it's really singing now. But definitely it's something every year when the champagne offer comes out, I tend to put cases in reserve.
Aged non-vintage is best value you can get. It's really fantastic.
We're quite careful at the Wine Society. So if you buy non-vintage champagne from us to put in your reserves, we do move the stock into reserves so that it's the vintage or the non-vintage blend that you buy at the time. So you will be.
It's good to know, because it's not the case of all wine merchants.
No, and of course we will occasionally have sip-ups, but that's the policy. That's what we intend.
So many members like me may be drinking. A few members have asked about disgorgement dates. Yes, they are still very much on the bottle. In particular, the one that I ordered this week for this tasting, so the one that many of you will either have in your glass now or order, was disgorged 2019. So i.e. that's when this wine was sort of sent to us, I guess, as was stopped aging and sent over to our way to age in our cellars. But it was laid on the chalk in 2016. So they were cellaring this in 16. So if members are not sure what dates currently are on stock, those are.
I think you have a member who is very, woman I respect a lot, because he said, I have a disgorgement of 2017. I don't know how you do to keep it 3-4 years in your cellar and not drink it. I possibly can't. So you must be buying a lot, so so you don't get spoiled too quickly.
Wonderful. No, I don't know either. So we have a couple of questions, Willem, that I'm going to kind of group together. And I appreciate it's not so champagne based, but we've had lots of members this evening ask about your views on English wine. Obviously, you're UK based, fantastic champagne representative, but what are your thoughts on British wine? Is there anybody coming close?
Yeah. No, very much. I think it's great what happens in with English wines. I think to put things in context, the soil of south of England is very much the same soil and matches almost the same kind of history of soil than Champagne, because it used to be a big sea from I guess roughly the Alps to Cornwall, basically. And actually, one of the type of soil we have in the south of Champagne, where I come from, is called Kimmeridgian, from the Kimmeridge, which is not in France, but in the UK. Funny enough, when I started working at Liberty Wines, I was looking after English and English sparkling wine and champagne. I was looking after Nightingale, Bright Valley, Hattingly Valley. I taste English sparkling wine regularly because I'm very interested. I think you have some great examples. I think there's probably an over offer for the demand, and you probably have 10-15 wineries that are very, very good. I'm thinking Nightingale is very good, very champagne style. Gusbourne is exceptional, but more typical English sparkling wine. Rasfini is very good. That's the last I tasted a few weeks ago. So I love English sparkling wine. I think there are some great examples. I think on average, I think you have two types of producers: those who try to copy champagne in style and in image, and those who try to have a British or English identity. I think all of them are still discovering their soil, and they certainly don't have any lesson to take on how to make wine, but certainly need time to know their soil. You know, in Champagne, the main difference is that we have been cultivating this soil for 300 years with some families there for longer, and you know, we know that the best plot is actually here or here, and actually in this year, this exposure, these grapes, and that's a process that England is discovering. So that's why I think wines are going to get finer and finer. Market is going to shrink because, you know, there is not so much demand, and it's going to get better and better. So no, all good. The more sparkling wine, the better. You know.
I think Sarah and I couldn't agree with that sentence more. Sparkling wine all day, every day. Thank you, Willem. I'm going to squeeze in 2 more questions if it's all right.
Go for it. I have time. So.
Oh, thank you. Well, Sarah's also, if anybody's asked questions in the Q&A, Sarah's kindly typing a few answers, and then fingers crossed, Willem, maybe we could sneak a few more from you over email afterwards as well. There are some fascinating questions, but there's a huge amount. I think we've still got 20 unanswered, so apologies. But Willem, we've had a few members ask what the new release is or what's next for Charles Heidsieck.
In terms of vintages?
Vintages, so, yep, new projects.
Releases, so actually this year is going to be busy. So first of all, Charles Heidsieck doesn't release lots of vintages or not very regularly. And the reason behind that is not that we don't have wine or grapes good enough, or that we are lazy or we don't like vintages. The reason behind that is that most of our vintage wines, they go in there. You need to understand that a wine that has the quality to be bottled on its own as a vintage, and a wine that's going to be kept for 20 years in stainless steel vat to be a reserve wine, they are the same. So every year, it's really a tough decision from our winemaker to decide, okay, first I need to secure reserve wines, because without reserve wines today, I can't do Charles in 20 years. So that's number one. If we have enough wines, and if we don't have loads of vintages in the cellar not sold, but it never happened, we always sell out quite quickly, we produce vintage. So that's why you don't see lots of vintages at Charles. You know, we did 2000, 2005, then we went to 6, then 8, then 12. After 12 will be 13, but not released this year. So we don't produce a lot of vintages, and neither in big quantity. It's always small volume. You know, vintage 12, I think it's 50,000 or 60,000 bottles. Vintage 8 was 25,000 bottles. It's literally nothing. So when you see them, buy them, because you never know when how long it lasts. But this year we have a vintage rosé 08, 21,000 bottles produced, beautiful wine, amazing. We are releasing that May, June. We are going to release some still wines, because we start playing with still wines from Champagne, so called Coteau Champenois. So we are releasing a white and a red wine this year. Literally, that's few barrels of each, so 100 and so bottles for the UK. And we've started in 2017 to release old vintages, anotech, but not late disgorged or the same wines, but just recently disgorged, which is great for many assets. But we have the chance to have treasures in our cellars of wines from the 80s, from the 90s, who have been released in the past and that we've kept a little bit as library stock. And so in 17, we decided to start putting a program in place where every year we release old wines. So I told you, 2020, we released some old non-vintage and some vintages 1990. In 2019, we released vintages 89s in bottle, Magnum, Jeroboams. This year, we are releasing the vintage 81 in bottle, Magnum. I think I have 2 or 3 Jeroboams. We found, actually, kind of breaking news for you, ladies and gentlemen, because Charles produced from 79 to 85 a prestige cuvée called Champagne Charlie, which we stopped because in 85, Charles Heidsieck was bought by Rémy Cointreau. Krug was also part of the portfolio of Rémy Cointreau, and therefore it was not making any sense anymore to have so many prestige cuvées. So it was stopped. And Champagne Charlie is still one of the most collectible prestige cuvées, again, produced from 79 to 85. And we actually found, looking at the Crayère, we actually found a palette of Jeroboams unlabeled, not accounted for. They were not in any softwares. And when opening it, looking at the cork, tasting it, our chef de cave realized that was Champagne Charlie 85 in Jeroboam, never accounted for, never registered, never released, nothing. So we are releasing 150 Jeroboams of Champagne Charlie 85 next year. We're going to have 10 or 15 for the UK. So it's a hefty price. That's going to be £5,000, I think, for a Jeroboam. But that's an amazing news as well for the craziest of you. And it's just the teaser of the relaunch of Champagne Charlie, because next year in 2022 we are going to re-release Champagne Charlie back as our prestige cuvée. Same thing. Teaser. You are one of the first. It was already, it already came out in the press a few years ago, and that's a question people often ask. But yes, we have Champagne Charlie aging in our cellar, and it's going to be released soon.
Wonderful. There we go. You heard it, maybe not here first, but it's first I've heard of it. Jordan has said they're going to go without food or start saving. So yeah. Oh, fantastic. Well, Willem, I'll tell you what, we've really enjoyed listening to you. We could listen to you for hours. But I best let members go and get their dinner. So one final question. You mentioned it really briefly on your last slide, but are we able to come and visit you when travel is allowed?
So the answer is no. We are close to the public for the reason that we are just not equipped and not authorized to welcome public, which is something we are. It's an investment project that we are doing because we want to be able to welcome officially public. So we can welcome friends, guests. It's just on appointment. That's going to be through you, through Sarah, through me. And since last year, we've started to do some open doors in the summer and do some picnic on the park. We have one of the most beautiful private garden in the center of Reims. So please, if you ever go to Champagne, come. And you are a Charles drinker, aficionado, lover. If we can accommodate, we will.
So important that members let us know, and then hopefully they'll be able to either come visit, or the picnic sounds absolutely heavenly. That would be on my bucket list for the summer for sure. So I think that's probably the best way to wrap up, with the idea of a lovely picnic in the Charles Heidsieck courtyard garden. It doesn't really get better than that, does it? So from myself, I'd just like to say a big thank you, Willem and Sarah, and to members for coming this evening, and to Gil and Catherine behind the scenes. But I will allow Sarah to do a proper handover, but I would just like to say a personal cheers. Thank you. Santé.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Willem, so much. It's a pleasure to see you tonight, and I can't wait to be back in Champagne at some point, hopefully this year. And I'm so glad that the invitation's there for members if they get in touch with you or I. But thank you, Anna, and Gil and Catherine backstage, and of course Rachel backstage too, for putting this all on. And everybody, we sort of don't go for the cliches very often, but I hope you all have a wonderful Valentine's weekend. And whether you're in wonderful relationships or enjoying your own time, I hope you do it with some champagne. Cheers, everybody. Thank you ever so much.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you very much for having me and for spending this time together.